So what we're going to be talking about next is the interface and the workspace that you're going to be using in Unity 3D. So before we begin, I got to explain the type of tabs and the important tabs that you're going to be using more frequently. So let's start with the project tab. So the project tab is actually where all of your files that you're going to be using for the project is going to be stored. And this can actually be viewed in the documents. So our actual project is new Unity project, so this is it right here. And if you go in and then go into assets, you're gonna see the project folder area, which is right here. They're both pretty much the same. So there are two ways to import files into the project folder. So you can either copy and paste or move here into the assets folder, or you can drag and drop here directly. Like, let's say, for example, this file. All you gotta do is drag and drop, and it'll import on its own. Just like that. You can also delete it normally as well. Now, in the project folder, this is also where you can create other objects or other files that you're going to need to create the game, as you can see here, but we'll get more into this later. Alright, next is the hierarchy tab. The hierarchy is actually a bit different from the project folder. They have the same function, but the difference is that anything inside the hierarchy tab is also inside the scene. So let's say right now we can see the main camera and the directional light. These are the only two things that are in the scene by default. This is also where you can create your other game objects. Basically anything in the hierarchy tab is considered a game object by default. And you can also see all the other game objects that you can add in here, whether it's 3D or 2D, UI, video, audio, etc. You can go ahead and explore that on your own time if you wish, but we will be getting into that more often in the future videos. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is the Inspector tab. It is one of the three tabs that you're going to be using very often. I've already explained the other two. Anyways, so in order to view the settings and to add more types of functionality into a game object, you're going to need to use the Inspector tab to do that. So what is a component, actually? A component is what gives a game object its functionality. Without a component, it could just be an empty component that doesn't do anything. So for example, this cube, it actually has 4 components. 2 of them are actually required since it's a 3D object. So what the mesh renderer does is it allows you to see the object inside the game. If you turn it off, you can't even see it. So it's basically invisible, but it's still there. And then there's the box collider, which if you actually enable it, it allows the object to collide with other boxes, and it could trigger some script effects or script methods, which we'll get into that eventually. Next is the Scene tab. Actually, this is actually self-explanatory. The Scene tab is where you will import game objects and edit them inside the world space or in the game scene. Now the difference between the Game tab and the Scene tab is that in the Game tab, you're only previewing the perspective of the game, but in the Scene tab, you can actually edit the game world. In the Game tab, you can't do any of that. However, in the Game tab, using these options above, you can actually view the game in certain aspects. But for me, I've set it to 16:9 by default, which is widescreen. Alright, next is the Asset Store. However, this is where I'll just put it briefly. The Asset Store is basically where you can find free or paid apps, and you can use them inside your Unity project. So just an example, I'll just show you what it looks like. So here you can see a bunch of Unity assets, both free and paid, that you can use. At the moment we're seeing the most of the paid assets, but you can go up here and just select get free assets, and you can even search it. You can search certain app sets and their names up here. Okay, so those are the tabs so far. Oh, there is one more. The console tab. The console tab is where you're going to check for errors and where you're going to check if a certain function works or if a script works when you get into coding C# or Unity. The animation tab, this is not normally required unless you are going to be going into animation. The animation tab is basically where you can animate objects using keyframes. So this is very similar to other animation applications such as Adobe After Effects and Premiere Pro, Adobe Flash, etc. And then the animator tab, we're just gonna leave this out for the meantime. This is a little bit too advanced. Alright, next is we're gonna be talking about how to customize your workspace. Now, if you've already made your new project, you may not get this interface immediately. This is what you're probably gonna get. This is the complete default of the Unity interface. So how are you gonna customize this? Well, you can actually, what you can do is click and hold, left click and hold the tabs, and just drag them around. Now this is how I like my, this is how I usually like my interface. I keep my project and console to my left side, and hierarchy to my right, next to my inspector. Oh, hang on. So at the moment, the project tab is actually set to 2 column, but if you want to set it to 1 column, you can right click the project tab and then use 1 column layout. This is very ideal if you're having the layout that I'm using, which is where the project is on the side and it's kind of like long portrait style. But if you're gonna be using something like this, I suggest switching it back to 2 column layout. So this is really helpful. Alright, anyways, now that we got the workspace set up, you can actually save it by going back to this tab up here on the top right corner, click default, and then go to save layout, and then just rename it to whatever you want. Just make sure that the name is easy to remember so that you know what kind of workspace you want to work with. Alright, so that is the basics of customizing the workspace and the functionalities of each tabs. Next thing we're going to be talking about is how to navigate the camera in the scene world, or in the scene tab.